Have you ever thought that fame, fortune, and the spotlight would be a ticket to happiness? I don't think so. Diahann Carroll's life is the most vivid proof of the terrifying cost of stardom, a screen queen who once made all of Hollywood bow down yet now, a deserted mansion, millions in assets ignored, and a death that sends chills down the spine. What happened? Who pushed Diahann from the pinnacle to the depths of despair? And why, even until her final breath, did she carry secrets no one dared mention? Her life wasn't just a series of tragedies, it was a dark labyrinth of power, betrayal, and loneliness. Think you've heard enough about the heartbreaking truths behind Hollywood's glamour? Not yet. This story will bring you to tears if you see it through from start to finish. On July 17, 1935, the Bronx sky was cloaked in a grim leaden gray. In the stark white room of Fordham Hospital, amid the relentless patter of rain against the windows and the howling wind echoing through the cold corridors, a new life let out. Its first cry, that was Carroll Diane Johnson, the child who would later be known to the world as Diahann Carroll, an icon of glamour, but also a witness to the profound tragedy lurking behind the stage lights. Her mother, Mabel Falk, then an exhausted nurse worn out by endless shifts at Harlem Hospital, cradled her tiny daughter as if clutching a fragile glimmer of hope. Her eyes, heavy from months of scraping by to pay bills and put food on the table, still sparkled with faith. Beside her, Carroll's father, John Johnson, a railroad worker in a uniform stained with grease, stood silently watching his wife and child. His rough hand rested lightly on Mabel's shoulder, carrying the weight of worries a man had to swallow. In that first moment of Carroll's life, there was already a potent mix of sacrifice, tension, and a quiet unease overshadowing the future. Their small family lived in a two-bedroom apartment on Grand Concourse peeling paint. On the walls, a chair with a broken leg propped up by an old phone book and a crooked family photo. No one bothered to fix. Carroll grew up to the sound of her mother's heels clacking early in the morning, her father's weary cough after night shifts, and the suffocating silences that stretched between her parents. She played with her sister Lydia on the icy floor, crafting her own world from worn-out toys and an imagination yet to be scarred. But her childhood couldn't stay carefree forever. In September 1938, when Carroll was just 3, a storm rolled in, not just outside the windows, but within her home. Arguments between her parents grew more frequent. Her mother's face grew gaunt, while her father seemed to carry a silent disappointment, shouting the crash of breaking objects and her mother's quiet sobs in the kitchen, all seared into the mind of a 3-year-old. Her small world was cracking slowly but painfully. In 1940, a flicker of hope appeared when the family moved to a third-floor apartment in Harlem, a place where every street corner hummed like an unfinished jazz tune. Harlem wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Kids played on the sidewalks, the smell of fresh-baked bread wafted through the windows each morning, and the saxophone from a nearby bar blended with the city's heartbeat. It was here that Carroll began to feel the magical pull of music. In a green cotton dress sewn from her mother's scraps, she stepped into Abyssinian Baptist Church, where singing was a sacred mission. Her clear voice rang out among the worn wooden pews, stopping the choir in a moment of hushed awe. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt something extraordinary had begun. Her parents, though, counting every penny, decided to enroll her in a local art school. They didn't have much money, but they had belief. Carroll was no longer the girl hiding in a corner. She was a child brimming with ambition, her eyes blazing, her voice steady, and her small but resilient spirit unyielding. Yet the early light came with long shadows. A Christmas performance in 1943 became the first cut to the pride of the 8-year-old. Carroll slipped mid-stage, her mother's 2 big shoes, making her stumble before hundreds of eyes. Soft laughter rippled from the audience. A few thoughtless chuckles, but to a sensitive child, they were sharp as knives. She fled the stage, tears streaming her body and tiny dreams both crumbling. From that moment, Carroll realized the path to proving herself would be harsher than she'd imagined. But she didn't give up. In 1945, with World War II still raging, Carroll unexpectedly won a scholarship from the Metropolitan Opera, a dreamlike door opening amid the rubble of reality. It brought her to New York's School of Music and Art, a holy ground for young talent, but also a place where differences were scrutinized without mercy. Carroll, a black girl from Harlem, walked into gleaming, mirror-like hallways and instantly felt every step watched. The eyes following her didn't hide their skepticism. During a vocal class when she sang, the room fell silent, not from awe, but from shock. The teacher, an older man with a cold demeanor, shook his head, his gaze dripping with condescension. Without saying it, he made the class understand that to him, her skin color couldn't hit the high notes. Carroll realized she was playing a game where the rules were never written for people like her, but instead of quitting, she turned pain into fuel. At night in their dimly lit apartment to save electricity, her voice rose each note, carrying her resolve and dreams. But the world didn't pause to let a young girl heal her wounds. In 1947, while staying with her Aunt Clara in a small North Carolina town, Carroll faced a colder, crueler reality. One late afternoon, she walked through a white neighborhood to get home. Her steps quickened, but not fast enough to avoid a group of kids waiting at the corner. They attacked without reason. They saw her skin, shouted slurs she'd never heard, but instantly understood as hate. A stone hit her left arm, drawing blood. Carroll didn't scream or cry. She stifled her rage and ran, carrying a small scar outside and a far larger one within. By the late 1940s, Carroll was no longer the girl who hid or fled from a stage fall. She was forming a new presence, steadier, sharper built from the wounds that shaped her. She walked to school with her head high, entered rehearsals as if used to the scrutiny. But old wounds didn't vanish. They lay dormant, waiting to resurface. One evening in 1949, while practicing for a school performance, Carroll overheard a classmate whisper behind her back, "They just needed a black face for diversity." The words weren't aimed at her directly, but hit her ears clearer than the background music. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. But Carroll didn't let those words crush her. She sang louder, steadier, sharper, like a clean cut through others' doubts. On June 10, 1950, Harlem still buzzed like an endless jazz riff, chaotic, vibrant, wild, and beautiful. Within it, Carol Diane Johnson, now 15, stepped out of childhood's cocoon. Signing with Ebony brought a mix of pride and emotion, and she chose the name Diahann Carroll, not just a stage name, but a quiet vow for a different life. Her life became a battlefield as she began molding herself. Her daily diet turned brutally strict. Rehearsals stretched until her legs gave out. Dance shoes tore at the toes. The wooden floor darkened with the sweat of her youth. On April 15, 1951, a turning point arrived. Under the dazzling lights of Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, Diahann appeared in a deep green dress. Each note she sang soft yet weighty. Her voice, smooth as silk, thick as smoke, carried all the summers her life hadn't yet seen. The audience sat silent, then erupted in awe. That victory was her first call from the wider world. 3 weeks later, her voice echoed across radios from New York to California. Diahann felt like she was living outside reality, where old sorrows lightened under applause. But the light soon revealed darker corners. On the afternoon of May 2nd in a recording studio, an older producer with silver hair pulled her aside. In a suggestive whisper, he said she should be friendlier for more opportunities, his eyes cold and calculating. A subtle touch teetered between power and exploitation, a look that needed no words to chill her. She politely declined, her gaze firm, but as she left the building, her hands were ice cold, her back pressed against a stone wall to keep from collapsing. In that moment, she understood the world she'd entered wasn't just glittering lights, it was laced with hidden traps. In 1954, Broadway beckoned House of Flowers, brought her to the big stage where every glance was magnified, where glory and failure were a heartbeat apart. On December 30th, the audience's murmurs behind the curtain mixed with her racing pulse. When the spotlight hit, she stepped out, not the Harlem girl anymore, but a figure carrying the hopes of generations. The show succeeded, but the next morning delivered an invisible blow. A morning paper's dry critique beauty was there, but talent wasn't convincing enough. Those words could crush pride. But instead of breaking, she swallowed the pain, fueling a quiet fire for the years ahead. Taking a supporting role in Carmen Jones, she entered Hollywood. On March 12th, the Los Angeles set blazed with harsh light. She stood under the lamps, sweat dripping down her cheeks, scenes repeated to the 20th, take each one rubbing her heart raw with shouted directions. No one saw the pain behind her steady eyes. Only in the break room did her body slump, hands limp with exhaustion. In October, Carmen Jones premiered. Her image filled the silver screen. People began remembering Diahann Carroll, not just for beauty, but for something else, an indefinable presence, a strength invisible to the naked eye. But behind the light were scars that never faded, sleepless nights, moments of wanting to quit, and questions of whether she could keep walking a path where every step cost blood and tears. In 1957, Diahann entered a new chapter where music was no longer just passion, but the next front in her fight to prove herself. On February 10th, she stepped into RCA Victor's Manhattan studio, where each note was an inner battle, each song a plea to be heard. When the album dropped in April, she poured her faith into the world, feeling her heart in its gentle melodies. But fragile hope shattered when a Billboard review stabbed like a knife, accusing her of being a copycat, lacking identity. That same year, she tried an experimental play at an off-Broadway theater where dim lights couldn't ease the weight of silent expectations. On June 20th, during a tense rehearsal after a long night of recording, Diahann flubbed a line. The director's harsh public rebuke hit like a fatal blow, nearly making her quit the role on the spot. But it was a fleeting thought. On the opening night of July 15th, as relentless applause filled the theater, she felt every drop of sweat, every moment of doubt and endurance crystallize into a victory, not just for her, but for dreams long forgotten. Her life began to soar from there, both in career and personal life. On February 14, 1958, in an intimate ceremony at Harlem's Abyssinian Baptist Church, Diahann, just 22, married Monte Kay, a renowned jazz producer who'd worked with names like Billie Holiday. Monte, with his calm demeanor and seasoned smile, had stood by music's giants. From their first meeting at a Greenwich Village jazz club in the summer of 1957, a powerful connection sparked not just from shared artistic passion, but from a mutual drive to shatter the racial prejudices strangling the entertainment industry. With Carmen Jones's glow still shining, Diahann saw in Monte a steady partner, someone who promised to always lift her dreams. The wedding was simple but warm, with a saxophone serenading the room and her mother Mabel weeping tears of joy as her daughter started her own family. But married life quickly strained not just by distance, but by a growing emotional divide. Monte's endless work trips from Chicago to Los Angeles, sometimes as far as Europe, left their Manhattan apartment silent. Late nights without the sound of the door opening became routine. One November night in 1958, Diahann sat in the dark, the clock striking 2 a.m. Monte still nowhere to be found. Phone calls filled with promises but lacking warmth became the first cracks in her trust. Then rumors trickled in about a young jazz singer in Chicago, about Monte seen cozy with her one March afternoon in 1959, when Diahann found a love letter hidden in Monte's desk drawer. Her doubts turned real. The sweet words written to him stabbed her heart, a heart wholly his, now shattered in silence. Loneliness and betrayal slowly walled her off from the husband who'd once been her safe haven. She began questioning her worth in Monte's eyes. Was she still a loved wife or just a perfect piece of his public image? One April morning in 1959, backstage preparing for her role as Clara in Porgy and Bess, she looked in the mirror and saw exhaustion in her eyes. Faith in love was fading, and in that void, Sidney Poitier's presence rekindled a sense of being understood. On set, his empathy, Higao admiration became a lifeline, something she'd craved from her busy husband, but never received. Her bond with Poitier bloomed quietly, becoming an undeniable divide between her and Monte sensed the growing distance. One April evening in 1962 in their shared apartment, he found a love letter from Poitier tucked in her coat pocket. The words ignited a storm of pent-up hurt, erupting into a bitter confrontation. In the darkened room, the couple who'd vowed to stay together traded only blame and pain. Monty left, leaving behind a sobbing wife, not just grieving a marriage, but the agony of losing custody of their daughter, Suzanne. On June 10, 1963, in a Manhattan courtroom, their marriage officially ended. The summer rain poured as if weeping with Diahann for the life left behind. Over the next decade, her career blazed. She starred in Julia, won a prestigious Tony for No Strings. But at home, a letter from 10-year-old Suzanne living with her father in Los Angeles pierced her heart. The child's scrawled words, filled with longing and confusion, broke the mother's spirit. Diahann read each word, her weary eyes staring into a hazy void, guilt surging like a tidal wave, nearly choking her. Her life was consumed by filming schedules, tours, and endless interviews. Every time she planned to fly to her daughter, fame yanked her back a world demanding more than any woman could give. Once she called Suzanne, but the voice on the other end lacked the warmth of early years. When the call ended, only a heavy silence remained. The gap between mother and daughter widened, an invisible but deep fracture growing with each year apart. On June 15, 1973, Suzanne graduated elementary school at a private Los Angeles academy. It should have been a sacred day, a milestone of childhood, but Diahann, tied to a last-minute Julia shoot in New York, canceled her flight. Monty, the father, spun an excuse to fill the void, but Suzanne's tears couldn't be hidden. That night, after a tense call, Diahann could only promise to make it up, though she knew the promise was as fragile as sea foam. Diahann tried to mend their bond with lavish gifts. For Suzanne's 16th birthday on September 9th of 1976, she sent a gold necklace with a pearl from Tiffany's, paired with a heartfelt note. But within a week, the gift returned unopened, holding the untouched package. Diahann let out choked sobs a mother lost. As her mother-daughter bond frayed, Diahann's personal life spiraled into another vortex. On January 20th, 1973, under flickering candlelight at London's Le Gavroche, David Frost, the famed journalist, proposed. With a heart scarred from Monte Kay and an unhealed wound from her scandalous affair with Sidney Poitier, Diahann thought she'd found an escape. They announced their engagement 2 days later at a lavish Mayfair party. But sweet days were soon overshadowed by prejudice and pressure. A Daily Mail article branded them a shocking interracial couple, a reminder that invisible barriers still trapped her. Cracks in her relationship with Frost grew as wedding promises kept getting delayed. One April evening, Diahann could no longer stomach his clumsy excuses. She realized he too flinched at the sneers, and she despised that cowardice. The engagement ring hit the table heavy as the end of an unfinished dream. In the chaos of a broken heart, Diahann rushed into a new mistake. On May 10, 1973, at a Las Vegas casino, she met Fred Glusman, a slick man with honeyed words that could sway a reeling soul. Desperate for an anchor, Diahann thought she'd found stability. They married hastily on July 15th in a small chapel surrounded by a handful of close friends, as if both were fleeing reality. But just 7 days later, Glusman's polished mask fell. After a few drinks, his charm turned to rage. In their private apartment, a sudden slap landed, followed by belittling insults, as if she were merely a shadow of a wife, not a woman who'd stood in the spotlight. Diahann fled to the bathroom, locked the door, and sank to the floor, clutching her stinging face, feeling her world collapse again. On July 25th, as dawn barely broke, she left with a small suitcase and nameless regret. The divorce papers were filed within a week. Yet amid the wreckage, a spark of hope flickered. On May 25, 1975, she married Robert DeLeon, a young Jet magazine editor 14 years her junior. The simple Chicago church ceremony glowed with light and faith. DeLeon brought youthful passion, a promise of healing. But the public wouldn't let it be. Ebony questioned the marriage's motives, while anonymous letters poured in, poisoning her with doubt. She tore up the venomous words, but unease took root. Their relationship hit turbulence, especially when DeLeon and Ambitious clashed over money and quietly manipulated their shared finances. Still, Diahann didn't yet see she'd chosen wrong again. Tragedy struck abruptly on the night of March 31, 1977. On Interstate 80, returning from Chicago, DeLeon's car crashed into a truck. He died on impact, leaving a void nothing could fill. At 3 a.m. on April 1st, the fateful call came. Diahann dropped the phone in the dark, her choked scream echoing through the room. In the days that followed, she all but vanished from the world. DeLeon's death wasn't just an emotional blow, it unleashed a financial storm that swept away what she had. On April 15th, a bank letter revealed a $75,000 debt from DeLeon's failed restaurant venture. 5 days later, her lawyer called with another $20,000 debt from an investment contract signed without her knowledge. Betrayal choked her as if she were flailing in a hidden flood. On June 10th, she sold her luxurious Manhattan apartment to cover the debts, moving to a smaller place in Los Angeles. To survive, she threw herself into acting her schedule more grueling than ever. But even as Dynasty elevated her fame, her personal life sank into another tragic spiral. On January 3, 1987, she married Vic Damone, a famous pop singer, in a lavish ceremony at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. At 51, after the painful failures of Monte Kay, Sidney Poitier, Fred Glusman, and Robert DeLeon Diahann hoped her fourth marriage would bring stability. One evening on January 10th, in their new Palm Springs villa, Damone held her close, whispering they'd grow old together, though the press hailed them as a golden couple. A vague dread lingered in her heart, as if she were walking on thin ice, ready to shatter. Her fears proved true. Within 6 months, Damone's controlling nature crept into every corner of her life. On the evening of July 15, 1987, in their villa's living room, he demanded she cancel a Broadway show to vacation with him in Florida. He shouted that she was his wife, not a 24/7 star. Diahann, her pride untouchable, snapped back that she'd never abandon her career for anyone. The fight ended with her storming out, driving to a hotel and crying in her room until midnight. Their lifestyle differences pulled them further apart. Damone craved a quiet, settled life, while Diahann burned for the stage. On December 10, 1990, she found a Las Vegas hotel receipt in Damone's jacket, hinting he'd been there with another woman. When confronted, he denied it, but his evasive eyes cut like a blade. Diahann, voice trembling, said she couldn't live in lies. On June 15, 1991, they separated, but in 1993, Damone apologized and vowed to change, exhausted by deep emotional scars. Diahann agreed, though she knew the fracture was too wide to mend. Hope crumbled on April 20, 1995, during dinner at a Los Angeles restaurant. In front of friends, Damone publicly berated her, saying she was just his wife, not a star like Dominique Devereaux. Humiliated, Diahann left the table without a word and filed for divorce on May 10, 1996, ending her fourth marriage in bitterness. In the years that followed, Diahann kept building her legacy with timeless works. She vowed not to quit, no matter how often the world tried to break her, but fate remained cruel. On June 10, 1997, Los Angeles' bright sun felt like a lie, masking the grim news. At 62, Diahann was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. Her doctor urged immediate surgery. On June 20th, she underwent tumor removal. In the cold operating room, under stark white lights, she lay feeling her soul hover between life and death. The surgery succeeded, but the chemotherapy months that followed were a relentless hell. Each morning in the treatment room, she sat still as drugs dripped into her veins, her body trembling. In the mirror, she saw a gaunt face, eyes dimmed by pain. But Diahann fought not just for herself. She became a fierce advocate for breast cancer awareness, especially in the African American community. Her greatest comfort then was her daughter, who after years apart forgave her and often cared for her during illness. In the early 21st century, Diahann lived more privately, but the stage still called. On March 15, 2013, she made her final TV appearance in White Collar, playing a small but striking role. After each scene, she rested, breathing heavily, her body weary from years battling illness. Cancer returned in 2015 like an old enemy with a cruel smile. Doctors said it had spread to her lungs. She refused long-term hospitalization, choosing to stay in her West Hollywood villa, where every corner held memories, a Julia photo, a sequined Claudine dress, her gleaming Tony on the shelf. In her final years, Diahann devoted herself to family, trying to mend gaps with Suzanne. On October 4, 2019, at 7 a.m. in her villa, she took her last breath. That moment, like a gentle breeze, came quietly in the loving arms of her daughter, Suzanne Kay, and 2 grandchildren, a serene but heart-wrenching scene leaving the once vibrant house cold and silent. The 350-square-meter villa, with its velvet furniture, abstract paintings, and elegant ebony tables, now seemed to stop breathing with its owner. That emptiness, that void, could never be filled. Diahann passed after a grueling battle with metastatic cancer, her departure like a final flame flickering out after years of burning bright. Her funeral was private, held at a Los Angeles church, attended only by family and close friends like Debbie Allen. News of her passing spread quickly, not just in the arts world, but among fans globally. On October 5th, The Hollywood Reporter noted she died peacefully, but all knew that peace followed a life of storms, pain, and loss. On X, thousands of posts poured in from young fans who saw her as a role model for acting dreams, to tributes from giants like Shonda Rhimes, who credited Diahann with paving the way. Ava DuVernay called her a guiding flame, an eternal icon, and countless others echoed her inspiration. On October 10th, BET aired a special replay of Claudine, one of Diahann's defining works, while Harlem theaters showed In Memory of Diahann Carroll, on-screen leaving audiences silent. Her black and white photos capturing her bold roles seemed to come alive, reminding viewers of a fierce, captivating Diahann. On October 15th, NPR's podcast, Diahann Carroll. A Life in Lights traced her astonishing journey from Harlem to Hollywood, moving thousands to tears. A Guardian article on October 20th called her a pioneering flame, burning bright, despite being stifled and denied deserved opportunities. Diahann Carroll is gone, but her legacy endures, shining through every film song and stage role she gave to the world. Her 1962, Tony 1968, Golden Globe 1974, Oscar nomination, and 5 Emmy nods are indelible marks of her monumental career. Her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, unveiled April 10, 1996, remains a pilgrimage site where fans leave flowers each birthday, reliving memories of a legend. But on November 15, 2019, a quiet undercurrent stirred the fragile peace after her death. A self-proclaimed cousin sent a letter to Suzanne's lawyer demanding a share of the estate, claiming they'd financially supported Diahann in the 1970s. The estate, valued at roughly $5 million, wasn't just numbers. It was the villa where time stood still, royalties from Julia and Dynasty, iconic recordings, and a collection of stage costumes. Thankfully, by February 10, 2020, the claim was dismissed for lack of evidence. Managing Diahann's estate wasn't just paperwork, it was an emotional journey. The West Hollywood villa, valued at $8 million in 2019, was one Suzanne refused to sell, even rejecting a $10 million offer in mid-May 2020. She insisted it would always be home, not for its worth, but for its intangible memories. Yet, with her own family, Suzanne rarely visited. Unmaintained, the villa grew old and cold, like an abandoned relic, leaving those who knew it with a pang of regret. Each glance at the villa brought back its owner's triumphs and heartaches. Diahann Carroll's story is a symphony of beauty and tragedy. From a cramped Harlem apartment to a lavish West Hollywood villa, from Abyssinian Baptist stage to Broadway's dazzling lights, she lived a radiant but scarred life. Every step proved her unyielding will, but every victory came at a cost. Nights crying for her daughter, heartbreak from love, and years battling a deadly illness.